Let's make some noise. Good morning. Welcome to today's International Working Women of Finland's Women's Day celebration. Let's give a huge round of applause to all of us. Hey. Unfortunately, the live stream is not working, but we will be having Zoom link for our online audience to join. But everyone joining here, thank you for being here, and happy Women's Day to all of you. And I say all of you because it is for everyone. We will be talking about gender equality and women in STEM today, but gender equality is quite intersectional. And that's why we say it is important to have all of us working together. My name is Priyanka Banerjee. I'm the chairwoman of IWWOF. That is the short form of how we say International Working Women of Finland ry. So quite a mouthful, right? And on behalf of IWWOF, we are really happy and grateful that you came here to join today's event. And those of you who don't know about IWWOF, we are a nonprofit organization started in August 2019, so a little over 2 years now, with a community of 7,500 super talented women and non-binary individuals. And that's so cool, isn't that? That was not the same 2 years ago. It started with one woman, our visionary founder, Galit Nadbornik, who is not here today, but you can all find her on LinkedIn. She's everywhere. Started with starting a Facebook group and inviting a handful of us to come together with a common passion and a vision of doing a change and creating some impact in the society. And 2 years down the lane, we are so happy to see the magnificent community that we have created. And it's really, really important to highlight the people behind it. So all the community members, all our great volunteers who have been super active to make that happen. It has been a journey. And what does that mean in practice? You know, we started as a Facebook group with almost zero funding, nothing in our hands. And in that 2 years, we have created almost 200 events leading to industry webinars, well-being events, community events, peer support groups, mentoring, and whatnot. Like, I can list down so many things that would not have been possible if our community members would not have done that for the rest of the community members. That is what our mission is, empowering each other and making society and a world inclusive, where we all belong, where we all would like to live. And we have on this journey started inviting partners, where some companies and associations are joining us, joining hands in our mission so that we can create a larger impact. And one of those companies is where we are today, Supercell. I am really thankful to Melanie, who has been supporting us all throughout this journey, and for kindly hosting us here in this venue and sharing such an amazing, delicious breakfast. I'm going to eat again because I just got to eat a very small piece. I hope you got to eat something on that time as well. So I will really ask quickly Melanie to jump in here and say a few words if you would like to share. So please give a welcome to Melanie.
Thank you. I just wanted to say a really warm welcome to everyone. It's really nice to see you all here. It's really nice to have an event in person again and have you at our new office. We're really excited to be a sponsor of IWWOF. I have been a member of the group for a long time. I lean on it heavily for support for our relocating spouses to Finland. We post job ads there, and I'm really excited to be part of the community. There's such a good feeling there, and we see the work you do as volunteers and the time and energy you put into making it a safe and inclusive community. So we are really happy to sponsor in any kind of small way that we can, because we see the work that you're doing. I am host in the looser sense of the word today. I just asked our events team if they could host an event here. So thank you to Johanna, Juha, and everyone who's helping us today, the people who've created the food. I've really had very little to do with it, but we're really happy to have you here. So warm welcome. You may also have family who are excited for you that you've come to Supercell. You may have children who play our games. You're very welcome. The foyer area is a great place to take photos. There's some really good characters and things there, so please feel free to take photos in the reception area on level 1 before you leave. But I think that's it from me. Really warm welcome, and thank you for all the work you've put into as well for organising today.
Thank you so much, Mel. Let's give a huge round of applause to her. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So let's start with our today's event. And like it was in the invitations, the topic is Women in STEM. And STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Maths. And this idea did not just came like that. It was all planned and a brainchild of our keynote speaker who is going to join us now, Audrey Kahn. She is a scientist. She has a master's in medical biology, and she's really interested in gender medicine and feminism in science. And after having a discussion with her, we were like, okay, let's do this. Let's do women in STEM. Like, it will be really cool. So maybe I will let her speak more about what is women in STEM, do an introduction, and later on we will go into a panel discussion where we will talk more about the impact and future of women in STEM. So welcome, Audrey. Let's give a huge round of applause to her. I will help you to set up your presentation if I can, because it's, yep.
Thank you.
Great, and the stage is yours.
Thanks. Does it work? Yeah. Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Audrey and I'm from France. And as Priyanka just said, I graduated from a Master of Biomedical Sciences last year. And this year I'm kind of taking a gap year to gain experience in feminist and NGOs. Oh no, NGOs feminists, sorry, about feminism. And next year, I would like to do a PhD or work in gender medicine because there is a big lack of knowledge about women's health and women's physiology. And also, I would like to try to participate to a more woman gaze in the biomedical research regarding women's health. So today, we're going to talk about women in STEM for the International Women's Day. And first, I'm going to try to explain to you why it's important to talk about women in STEM. Then why do we have an important gender gap in STEM still in 2022? And finally, how we can promote women empowerment in STEM. So, well, Priyanka just said it, but STEM stands for sciences, technology, engineering, and math. And so why is it important to talk about women in STEM? Well, because if you ask, what does a scientist look like? This is usually the answer you get. And for mathematicians, for engineers, and for a software or artificial intelligence developer. So basically, a STEM person does not look like a woman. And that's because women are really underrepresented in the STEM expertise. And that's not a coincidence, because this is the panel you get if you look at all the Nobel Prize winners in the scientific fields the past 3 years, meaning in 100 years, there's only been 25 women. And if you look at mathematics or informatics, this is also the panel you get, and that's one woman in each field. And if you look at the tech and engineering side, well, all the GAFAMs and those type of companies actually have men at the top of their companies. So no woman. And if we try to look a bit the numbers in Finland, well, just for an example, the 2 big scientific universities have directors. And if you try to look tech company CEOs in Finland, this is what you get on Google. So if we try to go a little bit deeper into the statistics of women in STEM, in Finland, if you look at educational qualifications, you have around 50% of women in natural sciences, math, and stats. and then 20% or less in tech and engineering. But then when you try to look at the principal occupations of women in 2020, science, engineer, and tech is actually at the bottom of the principal occupations. And you can see there's quite a big gap with men. And indeed, if you put the graph the other way around for men in 2020, science, engineering, and tech was actually at the top of the principal occupations. And again, here you can see the gap with women. And if you try to look at numbers in a specific field of STEM, such as astronomy, here, all the countries in green, blue, orange, they have less than 20 to 30% of women working in that field. And if you zoom in Europe and Finland, for example, you can see that there's rarely more than 20 to 30% of women in astronomy. So how come in 2022 we still have a big gender gap like this? Well, we have this fact that there is few women in STEM, and a lot of times it comes with the stereotype men are better than women at STEM that so many of us have heard and that is still going on. Well, I think we should prove today that it's not true. So the gender gap is explained by multiple facets such as discrimination, promotions and leadership, gender pay gap, sexual harassment, the bias of motherhood, and jobs that can be very gendered. So a first reason of this gender gap could be a psychological and cultural approach via an educational genderization. So if we come back to that stereotype, men are better than women at STEM, this professor tried to look into how kids can believe it. And indeed, she saw that girls, when they believe it, it leads to a decreased motivation to pursue any studies or careers in computer sciences engineering, whereas boys, it will actually increase their motivation. And with that stereotype being believed, we continue this vicious cycle and the perpetuation of a gender gap. And some jobs are still also very gendered nowadays. So a lot of women actually work in human resources or administration or legal work, whereas men are usually more in jobs with responsibilities of profit and loss or being head of a division or any steps to become a CEO. And that actually even biases a lot of the numbers that we have, because if a tech company says, oh, we have 40% of women, well, sometimes among those 40%, there's actually like 10 or 20% that work in human resources, for example, and that do not actually do tech work. And another explanation for that important gender gap is the genderization of sciences. And that goes a little bit into semantics. Because nowadays we have social sciences, which are psychology, sociology, political sciences, and natural and technological sciences, which are physics, chemistry, biology, and computer sciences. But for the past decades and years, social sciences have been called soft sciences, whereas natural and tech sciences have been called hard sciences. And with this semantics, now soft sciences are strongly linked to womanness, whereas hard sciences are strongly linked to maleness. Meaning that now the general public kind of have soft and hard sciences view via gender representation. And that's, well, kind of bad, because now soft sciences are seen as more subjective, less rigorous, and easier, whereas hard sciences are seen more objective, more rigorous, difficult, and we need to earn more recognition. And there was this study done where they tried to look a bit more into this, and they saw that actually the perception can be easily manipulated, meaning that if you tell to people, oh, this field has 70% of women, well, people will end up calling it a soft science. And a soft science is usually associated to less reliability, less prestigious, and compared to a hard science. And they saw that the association in reverse was also a thing, meaning that if a field is called a soft science, then they expect that there will be more women in it. And what they conclude in this study is that any field that is labeled women fields, if, for example, tomorrow the tech industry has 70% of women and 30% of men, well, they say that a risk that can happen is that instead of the woman actually being empowered in the tech field, what's going to happen is that the tech field will be devalued. So there's less value, investment, and funding, that men are less interested into the discipline, that the stereotypes persist, and there's a decrease of respect and trust. And so it's very important to deconstruct all the stereotypes about women while we empower women in STEM, so that when a field is also labeled as a woman field or there's parity, the fields still have as much value as when they had men or more men. And so what's happening over time for women in STEM? Because actually a lot of women go into STEM, but then it's hard for them to stay. Because in the working culture, there is a lot of discriminations and important consequences that go with that. So this study tried to look into the major reasons why there are not more women working in STEM. And the first one or like the most important one, is that a lot of women face discrimination in recruitment, hiring, and promotions. And then the second and third reason are that girls are not encouraged enough to pursue STEM subjects from an early age, and that for women, it's more difficult to balance work and family in the STEM jobs. And the study also showed that indeed women earn less than men when they do the same job, and that they are not treated as competent as men. So of course, after this, it's difficult for women to wanting to stay in the STEM world. And then there's also the big bias of motherhood, because still in 2022, the maternity leave is not taken into account into grants and funding. And being a mother or pregnant can easily be seen as being less competent or committed or less effective in a workaholic culture work environment. So that, of course, always have a big impact on the career, on the employment, and on the economic costs. And there are important consequences, for example, in academia. Well, one of them in this famous and very prestigious journal Nature, there is only 18% of women as senior authors, which is really low. And when you think of promotions and leadership, well, for women, it will be also harder to get there because, for example, there is the Matilda effect, where a lot of the women's ideas are sometimes more likely to be attributed to men. And for example, we have Ada Lovelace, who was the first computer programmer, and her discovery can be commonly attributed to Alan Turing, or Rosalind Franklin, who discovered the structure of DNA. And her work was awarded to Francis Crick and James Watson, who received the Nobel Prize. And finally, and this is still very occurring in now, a lot of investors still prefer to invest in companies that are created and led by men compared to companies that are created or led by women. And if we try to look a little bit at the gender evolution in the digital jobs, well, actually in the 60s, when informatics was still kind of minutious and not very that common, women had an important place in engineering and math. But then throughout the decades, well, those sciences have been seen quite as the opposite of where women should be. And then tech became this really hype and successful field. And this is when it really became a men field. And now, although it's supposed to be progressist, it actually still works with a lot of conservative sexist mechanisms and our artificial intelligence, algorithms, vocal assistants and programs, a lot of them still reproduce the social norms of our society and the discriminations. So we have the fact that we have few women in STEM, but that's not because men are better than women at STEM. That's only because we have educational and cultural and social and perceptions that are very anchored into the society still. And an important topic to emphasize in STEM also is intersectionality. So for those who don't know that word yet, it's when people are labeled with different variables such as gender, ethnicity, class, religion, sexual orientation. And the people who are at the intersection of these different labels that can be put on their face usually face multiple discriminations in the work area. And so if we look at women in STEM, not only there are few famous women, so for example, Sally Ride or Lisa Jackson, but most of the women are Western, Caucasian, and cisgender. So there's a real lack of representation of women for other countries, other ethnicities, other cultures, and that's a big important gap. And then those people usually face the double bias of racism and sexism. And in crises such as COVID, for example, usually these people are even more socially isolated and less supported from their work. And for example, in the US, there is only 2% of Black females who are practicing scientists in faculties and professorships. And in Brazil, there is only 3% of Black females who supervise PhD theses. These people can also be easily bullied or harassed. And the UK Royal Astronomy Society, for example, looked into it, and they saw that in the last 12 months, 50% of the LGBTQ plus were suffering from bullying. So how can we change all this and try to promote women empowerment in STEM? I will briefly introduce this because then the panel will discuss it further. But we need to increase visibility with history and with models. Indeed, now in the movies, for example, or the TV shows, men are 14 times more likely to be depicted in STEM professions than women. So we need to change these models and have more women. And well, visibilization can be done at an individual scale. For example, Jace Wade, she's a physicist, and she wrote 270 pages of woman figures on Wikipedia because she was shocked of how little woman was on Wikipedia. Then we can try to make Alexandra Elbaikan more visible. She created the website SciHub, which is one of the most used websites in research nowadays, but no one talks about her. Then at the international level, there are more and more awards to try to empower women in science, such as the L'Oréal UNESCO Award, or we have the Pleiad Awards in astronomy, or the Athena Thwan Gender Charter Award that is being distributed in a lot of industries that try to empower women in science. Another example at a more associative level is the Homeward Bound program, where they try to empower women in leadership in network when it's women who have a STEM background and fight for climate change. Or happening right now in the States, for example, there is this type of exhibition where they just printed 120 3D statues of women in STEM to make them more visible. And a second option is the education for all. So for example, at a more national level here in Finland, there is the STEM School Finland, where they try to educate about robotics and programming and science education from an early age onwards and for both genders. But then there's also, for example, Soapbox Science, which is an association that try to not only democratize science to the general public by making free events in the street, but also empower women, as it is only women scientists who can talk about their projects and their research or their findings and do it out there. And that's already been going on in quite a lot of countries. And then in the toy industry, there was this engineer, Debbie Sterling, who created Gold Deep Blocks, who is a game to learn engineering, or like what is being an engineer to kids. And she made sure that the marketing would target girls because she knows how the toy industry is really gendered, and that, well, a lot of games into that field are actually always marketed for boys. And finally, we can think of promoting more inclusivity and then implement more solutions at a political and a legal level. And for this, there is a lot of ideas with measures that can be into place, or indexes, some data transparency or collection, different initiatives or policies that can be put into place into the work area. Yeah. And one example is the company Sanofi, who collected and analyzed internal data. And with this, they were able to identify specific gender discrepancies and then to implement a woman-focused management trainee program. And it actually worked, because since 2018, there was 30 women who participated to the program that were promoted. And in the North America business, it used to be run by 5 men, and it's now run by 5 women. So if we try to see a little bit of the progress today, well, those are the awards that have been given by Mark Zuckerberg in 2022, so not that long ago, in math, life sciences, and physics. And the panel is a bit more inclusive, and there is a bit more women, even though there's still progress to do. And in India now, for example, 43% of the degrees in STEM are earned by women. And in Iran, 55% of physics PhD and candidates and high school science teachers are women. So progress is happening, even if it's slow. And I would like to quote this sentence that Isabelle Collet said, that it's not you who needs this job as the field, but it's this field who really needs you. And we need to make those places a safe place so you can stay. Yeah, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey. That was really good and very fitting last sentence. It's the field that needs you. So thank you very much. And there are so many things that we would like to open up and discuss a bit more. And for that, we will be now calling our panelists so we can discuss a bit more about the impact. We saw what is the status of women in STEM, what has been the progression, what are we doing in terms of it, but how does it create an impact? Is there impact for having less women or less diversity in the STEM field? And what is the future? How can we develop? How can we move forward? So to do that, I would like to invite now our panelists. We have here with us Elena Shaw. She's a PhD candidate at Aalto University, doing her research in algorithmic bias in artificial intelligence. We have Zainab Saleem here, and she is also a doctoral candidate, and she's working on that distributed space system. Yeah, so in the space technology. And then we have Janne Tienari. He is a professor in Hanken, and he works quite a lot with strategy, also gender and diversity issues. So we would like to also tap into his mind and know more about his experiences. So welcome, everyone. And if some of you are thinking, why am I in this panel? What am I doing? I'll give a bit of a background. And I have a background in electronics and communication engineering myself. I worked as a tech consultant for several years. And now I am the CEO and co-founder of Business Wiz. And we are helping companies, mostly engineering and tech companies, to become more diverse and inclusive. So while I will be moderating this panel today, I would also share my experience being a woman in STEM and also being a female entrepreneur in the STEM field. So let's begin. So Elena, I told a little bit about you, but tell about what you do and what is your research about. It would be interesting in short.
Sure. So as you'd already mentioned, I'm currently doing PhD research at Aalto University. I'm working on the topic of algorithmic bias in machine learning and artificial intelligence. I'm also consulting at Silo AI on projects that are related to this topic. Before that, I spent a few years working as a software engineer, mostly in the States, sometime in the UK. So for me, I was inspired working in the field to see the impact and sort of the behind the scenes of algorithmic bias and how it comes to be. So I was very interested in pursuing and researching this and trying to figure out, okay, how do we solve this problem?
Mm-hmm. What about you, Zainab? How did you end in space technology, which is quite gender segregated?
Hi, everyone. My name is Zainab Saleem, and I'm doing my doctoral studies at Aalto University in distributed satellite systems. I'm also working part-time in ISI as an attitude and orbit determination engineer. I did my bachelor's from Pakistan in mechatronics engineering, and then did my master's in Erasmus Mundus program in aerospace and spent a year in Finland. I then went back home, worked in Pakistan a bit in academia, came again to Finland in 2017, and have been working at ISI since then, and I've been living in Finland since then. And I think my career in engineering started with my love of physics, but then I guess life happened, and here I am.
That's a good movement of your life. What about you, Janne? Would you like to tell us about yourself?
I guess I'm the odd one out here in many ways, because I've always been interested in what people do together in organizations, and more recently what people and technologies do together and how they can or cannot be managed. So I'm a business school person, and I come from a very gender segregated field myself. The business school setting is such that there are boys or men's disciplines and girls or women's disciplines, and I happen to represent a very female-dominated field, management. And business schools are also vertically segregated in the sense that people like me are extremely overrepresented at the top echelons of the organization as professors. So I can relate to everything that Audrey in this fantastic presentation said, and actually she covered a lot of the things that I wanted to say. So I think I'll just try to stay as quiet as possible this morning.
That's great. Thank you, Audrey. That was really a power-packed presentation that we had. And what do you think, Elena and Zainab, seeing the presentation and the women in STEM and the status of women in STEM? One thing that caught my eyes was the inclusion part, that how the culture in the organizations might make women leave STEM. That was my case. I quit my STEM job to become an entrepreneur because of that reason. How has been your experience being a woman in STEM?
Sure. So I'll start. So I didn't grow up in the US. I grew up in South China. And there wasn't, at least in my family, there wasn't a lot of the stereotype of boys and men do this and girls and women do this. I was actually, in fact, very pushed to excel in all academic fields. Not that I was a very good student, but I was pushed to do so. And it wasn't actually until I moved to the US that I started hearing this narrative that was completely new to me, that there was this idea that, you know, boys can do some things and girls can do other things, and you can't really interchange. And so I would get comments from like boys, kids and teenagers that's like, well, you did so well in your math test probably because you cheated, or, oh, you only got into the engineering program because you're a girl and they need more girls, so you're a less qualified engineer anyway. Mm-hmm. But then, so I am a very stubborn person. I inherited that from my mother. I really pushed through, and I think I would say that all these comments have really pushed me to be stubborn and earn all the degrees that I have. I would say probably all the degrees I earned were because of the stubbornness. I want to prove to the world, I want to prove to these boys that I could do physics, that I could do statistics, that I could do engineering. But the one battle that I do regret that I wasn't able to win on that case was I studied physics in my bachelor's, and the only female professor in the physics department, we got really close. And one day she told me, you know, Elena, how serious are you about your interest in physics? What are you thinking? I told her, well, I'm really interested in particle physics. I think it'd be really cool to do that kind of research. And she basically goes, if you want to do it, you should do it, but you need to know that it's a very hard field. Physics research is a very difficult field to navigate. There's a lot of discrimination that you're going to need to handle. And for me, I was like, okay, I'm interested in this, but I don't know if any field I go into with physics is going to be hard. Mm-hmm. And given her statement about physics being specifically hard, and especially in research, I was like, I don't really want to have an even harder battle than I'm already going to have. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I didn't go into physics research. And that's my one lost battle so far. So,
mm-hmm. What about you, Zainab?
So I've worked in academia and industry, both in Pakistan, in Finland, and in Germany. And Finland, by far, has been the most gender-neutral society that I've been into. But still, the statistics are not very different from the rest of the world. I think if you say that there is a gender bias in STEM, I think all of us agree that there is. Wherever I have been, the ratio to women and men in the field has always been 1:10 or less. And especially now, talking about my experiences in Finland, working here for the last 4.5 years, is that I've seen that when the first off is that when a person comes to job after the interview and everything, and if it's a male person, he's already qualified, and everybody already thinks that since he has gone through all the process, he's competent. But when a woman comes into the workplace and she has gone through the same process, she has to prove herself before anybody would acknowledge that she is competent. So in the end, I've seen the women around me, we end up working double hours, end up overworking ourselves just to prove that we are here and we deserve to be here. And that's very different for our male peers. When they just enter the room, okay, he's here because, of course, he knows something. But if you're here, you have to prove that you know something. So that's something that's different. And then I've also seen, as of my experience, is that when a male peer or male engineers comes to the industry, especially aerospace industry, and he wants to go forward or he wants to lead, the male peers would literally, if he wants to climb a wall, would put their hands under his feet to help him climb. But the same is missing for women, and I think so I think they have more support. And also I think one of the things that I've seen is the lack of accurate feedback for women. So if I'm a woman, Zainab, oh yeah, you're doing great. You did a great job. And I'm like, okay. But if the same qualification or the same job is done by a male person, it would be like this. Oh, you did great, but I think you really think about taking a leadership role. So maybe you should work on this and work on that. So you just give a very average feedback to women, just saying that it's great because you don't expect them to do harder. And that's always what has been there for me, that you just would take them on an average and their average is good enough. But for a man, the average is not good enough because he has to
they
go
can
further.
do more.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've really seen that boys cheering for boys a lot more than boys or women cheering for women. So I really think that it's like that horse race when you're going over obstacle. I think for that, women is that, and for men, it's just an open field. I've really experienced it, and I think this needs to change.
Yeah. I totally resonate with that. Yeah, I totally resonate with that, because one of the reasons why I quit was also a constant underestimation. That someone would call your supervisor that, hey, we need an urgent thing to be done, and we don't know, we just directly contacted you because we are not sure Priyanka can handle that in the time limit without even asking you. So those kind of constant cultural battles, that at some point you're like, I would be so much better by myself, doing and creating something of myself. So maybe Janne, share your insight, because you work, as you said, in a quite female-dominated space. How has been your experience of seeing, or have you ever recognized having differences of experience by your male and female students or colleagues?
Well, of course, I can only guess. I can only speak for myself. And again, going back to Audrey's presentation and your comment, a lot of this is social, isn't it? You may call it cultural. I prefer to call it social. But anyhow, I think there are at least two different angles on how to sort of impact on the future. And the first one is, of course, again, what Audrey already referred to, is building the future, in the sense that, what little girls and boys are doing today, and how we can encourage different kinds of girls to get involved in activities that may then, make them seen as talent by the various organizations in the field of STEM. So that's, I think, important. Different kinds of women. So not everyone needs to be tough anymore. I think that would be a good goal, in order to make it, I'll leave my second point till later.
Okay, so we will get back to that when we are discussing how can we move forward from there. But it's quite, now we have, like, after looking at Audrey's presentation and our experiences, that this is how it is at the moment. But what is the impact? How does research is done by male gaze for women products, or female-based medicine, or even products that are made for women or for non-males, made by a very majority-looking population? What is the impact that have on our day-to-day lives? And I think you work very closely with the topic of algorithmic bias. So what do you see? What is the impact of having lack of diversity in these fields?
Sure. So not to bury the lead, I think my one sentence statement would be, the impact is that you create a self-sustaining cycle that is affecting all of us as consumers. participants, but also contributors, also participation. And when you have that self-sustaining cycle, it becomes a rooted culture, social culture, that is very hard to change. So I'll talk about this from a more general engineering design perspective, since that's where most of my experience has been in engineering development. And I'll use a very approachable example here so that we can all get on the same page. So hopefully all of us here have experienced opening a door. So this should be a common experience for all. It's not really experience. It's not the right word, right? Because it's just a quick step that you do, right? But for certain subpopulations, opening a door is a strenuous task. It is more than just a step that they have to go through. These include, if you've ever watched toddlers, pets try to open doors, it's really funny. You know, they can't open it, and it's so funny watching them struggling, right? On the less humorous side, sorry, my comedic time is not great. On a less humorous side, though, you also have people, you talk about accessibility. You have wheelchair users, people who have injuries that have a hard time opening doors, fundamentally because doors are not designed for them. They are in the minority population. They are not the default, so the doors were not designed for them. So the reason, and then you have solutions in the engineering space. You have one solution, which I think all of us have seen, are automated systems. You press a button and the door opens, right? This is one solution, but it's also quite a problematic solution because one, it's very expensive. You have to install the mechanisms, you have to maintain the mechanisms. And then in addition to that, it's now made opening doors a harder experience for everybody because that door is heavier, you have the mechanism that's stopping you from opening it. And so this, of course, leads to a lot less adoption in general. So then you don't solve this fundamental issue of doors being a hard experience for certain people. Now it's a hard experience for everybody, equality. The other solution here is you fundamentally go back to the design board and say, rather than having a door that opens on a hinge, what if we just redesign doors that slide? And that's one solution that the accessibility design community has created, is just you don't have to install anything. It's a lot less expensive and you just have a door sliding. So the reason why I want to use this as an example is for twofold. One, I think it's a very simple, easy to understand way of looking at the design engineering framework. You have the design phase where you're trying to create something. This doesn't just apply to engineering, but you have that creation phase, right? And then you deploy it to the real world, you test it, and you start seeing problems. You get feedback. This is the feedback stage. You start seeing, okay, here are the things that we didn't think about, and here's what we need to correct. The other reason I think that this is a really good example is that I think it's a good analogy as well. This idea of having a difficulty of opening the door, where it could be very easy for the majority default population. They can just go in and enter the room and access that space. But by analogy, there are people who have a very difficult time even just getting into that space. So when you start talking about this process of design and of feedback loop in product design, what you mentioned about the default people. In engineering design, male bodies tend to be the default. And it really impacts women on a daily basis when you start talking about things like protective gear. Seatbelts are a lot more efficient in protecting male bodies than female bodies. And then this even gets more complicated when you start talking about women staying in STEM, where you have protective gear that are for combat purposes, but they're designed for male soldiers. Or if you have astronauts, space suits that are designed for male astronauts and not female astronauts. And then because of that default, you create that cycle, right? You have few people participating. So then there's less design for them. There's less feedback, so they don't make many changes. And then that causes fewer people to want to join that field. This is exclusionary culture, right?
Yeah, it's like it's going on and on as a feedback loop, like you said. And that's very true because I first read about that in the first time we tested cars with female dummies was 2011. So very recently, a decade ago, which before that, it was 47% more likely for women to get injured in a car accident. And even today, these cars, they don't have a mandate to be tested for female dummies. And I'm still waiting for the day when Facebook will finally be able to recognize me and tag me and not my mom to all my posts, which has created a lot of issues in the past.
then that's actually a really perfect segue to my next example, which is more in my very specific domain of expertise on algorithmic bias.
Yeah.
Because the default isn't always just a physicality. It's always just not the male body. It can also be the male experience versus the female experience or the minority experience. The big example being in social media, but also on the topic of harassment, bullying, hate speech, right? You can make the argument that, we didn't know what we were doing when we were designing these platforms. That's why we had a feedback loop in design engineering, right? We're trying to fix this issue by deploying algorithms. Because it's at scale, that's how we can solve it, right? But those algorithms, that redesign, so to say, is still developed by the majority experience. And so you end up with algorithms that say, will censor sentences such as men are trash, but will believe perfectly fine this exact same sentence, women are trash.
Hmm.
And so that I feel like is a very direct and understandable example here of that hostility that non-minority get when they participate in certain majority environments. And for women especially, that is that cycle of, well, this is unwelcoming field, so I don't want to participate in it. And because we're not participating in it,
it's an unwelcoming field.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and it becomes a culture of that.
Yeah. What about you, Zainab? Because I think this is my assumption, you can correct me, that in the space technology, there are very few women. And what do you think are the direct or indirect impacts of that to our everyday life?
Yes, of course. So, for example, I think I would say that like I previously mentioned, that women overworking themselves or not being encouraged or being given leadership roles. Most of the women either do not pursue these fields because life is already difficult. Why make it more difficult, right? Everybody wants a comfortable life. And so it shouldn't be a constant battle, but it is. I think another impact about this is that most of the women do not make it to the top. They leave or retire their careers or end their careers at the middle management or middle career roles because they're not encouraged to do so. They don't have a very conducive environment to do so. And I think I don't have the exact number, but women are more than half of the population of planet. And imagine if half of the population of this planet are not contributing or not making their full impact. So a planet where half of the population is not doing anything or is doing very less, what kind of sad looking future that is for this planet? I've seen women around me and they're always brilliant. I've never met somebody or I've never met an individual that because of their gender, I could say that they can do this or they cannot. So women are capable. They just do not have been given this ground to do so. So I think the impact is very huge from small level to the grand picture.
Yeah.
And I think another thing about this cultural social thing is that it's not just one boss not giving you the opportunity. It's about little things that happen on the way. I would call that microaggressions. For example, but you're very aggressive, Zainab. The same male peer, oh, he's very passionate. He has the right leadership qualities. Oh, Zainab is a tough nut to crack. These wrong use of adjectives and adverbs, this needs to stop so that women can continue doing what they want to do and we can have everybody contributing.
Yay, we can. That's true. That's so true that the impact is not, at one level. At every level, from the smallest level for the gadgets that we use in our hands to a global economic level. Because if all the women, they had an opportunity to participate, I think our world global economy would flourish and we would never see lack. So that's so good. Thank you for sharing that. But let's then think about how, because we are not here to only complain, which is actually, very important, because unless you speak up, unless our voices are heard or experiences noticed, we're never going to make that change. So it's very important. But it's also important to look at it from a solution-driven perspective and how all of us can come together and build a society where we can see the progression that Audrey was showing, which is quite slow. But how can we make it fast? So you work quite a lot in that field, Janne, and you're also a part of the majority group that has a lot of power, and they have a lot of, I would say, impact on what you do and what you say and how you create the environment. So what would be your inputs to creating this inclusivity?
Well, I'm not sort of pretending to be any kind of solution here. Sorry.
Well, we're just discussing what can be
I
done.
have some suggestions maybe
Yes.
for all of us to think about. My gut feeling is that we need this kind of symbolic, more general discussion, but then we need to zoom in to particular organizations and how they're managed and how people interact and relate to each other in organized settings. And that's pretty much what I've always been interested in terms of research and teaching. And I've come to realize that a perspective where you don't really look at individuals, but you look at what people do together is quite useful to get the discussion going, maybe, work for change. I refer to that as the doing perspective. So doing gender may sound a bit corny, but if you think about it, gender, if we agree that it's something social as well as biological, it is about us doing it. And therefore, my focus is always on recurring activities in organizations, what we could call practices, perhaps, and tapping into these practices, making them visible for all to see, maybe even think through the assumptions underlying these practices. I think that's a good way to get change going, I would argue at least. So usually we research practices like recruitment, retention, talent management, those sort of things, strategy work, how strategy is done in organizations. But listening to your stories, I'm thinking that product development or design could be looked at as a practice, underpinned by particular kind of gendered and racialized and other assumptions. So that would be my way of getting the discussion going. I know there are people here, who actually do this in real life, try to get people in organizations to work together in new ways. But I would argue that it's always a social thing. It's not about individuals per se. It's about what we're used to doing together and how to change that, little by little, I'm afraid, often. Nothing, dramatic, no breakthroughs, but getting more and more people to realize that, hey, we can do these things in other ways too. So making things visible, try to get people to think through the assumptions that underlie these practices. That would be my way of looking. And one final comment.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I'm talking too much. It's not only about gender. And again, Audrey referred to this as intersectionality. So I always look at doing difference. So gender and something.
So I really like the way that you said doing gender. I would be really interested in knowing what does that mean in practice, in more practical terms.
We are doing gender here, and I'm trying to do it in a slightly different way than you'd perhaps expect me to do. So I'm more apologetic than, so I'm trying to, show that, we're doing gender here and we could do it otherwise.
Okay. Yeah. You want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in because I had this whole speech planned and I didn't really get to finish it, but I think this is a really good framework for finishing this speech that I had, which is it fundamentally comes down to the decision makers. Who are the decision makers in the room? I talked about it from a design engineering perspective, but it's really at a greater level and a higher theme is who are the people who are making these decisions. And it doesn't, yes, it's important to have women in STEM, but it's also important to have diverse perspectives in there who are able to be these sponsors who create these opportunities, and they are able to spot these deficiencies and say, hey, something needs to be done about this. Let's just not go, we can't just make decisions based on default. We need to think about here's my experience, here's this other person's experience that I've seen. It doesn't seem like we're answering that, we're fulfilling that, and we're dealing with that scenario. And that's definitely going into the management, and how do we start having organizations. How do we start doing this gender?
Yeah, but also I like what you said in the terms that it shifts the perspective to action, taking action, not just about thinking about it and just, talking about it, or we are all equal. And a lot of times, because I work with the companies on the topic, and I have heard this many, many times, that we are already equal. Finland is a very equal society, which is very true, but it's also very gender segregated. And putting this discussion into the doing mode, that we really need to do something together, it creates maybe a different outlook or perspective to look at it.
Yeah, it involves us all, and in different kinds of setting. Finland has a lot of female-dominated professions and fields and organizations, but the dynamics are such that it's always us doing it together rather than us as individuals. But you're right in pointing to power and some people, being in positions of authority. So yes, those people need to change too, and maybe they have the possibilities to sort of kickstart something that others couldn't.
And I think another thing to add to this is that we are all in Finland currently, but Finland is not the only nation in the world. Most of us operate in organizations that are international. Most of us will interact with international people if we're not already international ourselves, right? So this experience Finland has a very great structure, and there's definitely a lot that's inspiring here. But fundamentally, we do interact with these stereotypes. And I think it's very important to recognize that these stereotypes exist, and we do interact with it in Finland as well.
Yeah, that is very true. Zainab, would you like to have any suggestions of what and how to change this? And I know that you have been doing some programs in Pakistan for She for Tech. So I think that that's very important to also talk what Audrey mentioned, that it's a structural issue. So we have to look at it from a structural point of view. And it starts from a very early age.
So I've been running an impact program in Pakistan that's called She for Tech, but I would explain how. So the problem is, which is the same in Finland at the moment, that we do not have female leadership in STEM or in science and technology. We don't have female leadership because we don't have enough women engineers or women technology personnel working. Why we don't have that? Because we do not have enough women in the university studying engineering fields, because we do not have enough women applying to those universities. So how can that be changed? So in middle school, at the end of 8th grade or something, the kids decide their subjects for high school. And if you are not taking maths or physics, or if you're not taking engineering subjects or technology subjects, there's no way you would get admitted in a technology university. So we have to go to the root of the problem. If we do not have enough women applicants to the university, how are we going to make a gender neutral, companies? So what we need to do is we need to go back to the middle school, and that's what we are doing with She for Tech in Pakistan. We need to go to the middle school, and we need to make sure that enough female students or female child, girl child are interested in STEM fields or are encouraged to pursue STEM fields. And there's one thing that I would like, so we need to have programs. We need to have assistive programs, out-of-school activities, co-curricular activities, to make sure that the girl child knows that this is what she can do. And then, of course, there was one question one of my friends asked, why Women's Day is celebrated? Why not Men's Day? But the thing is that we have to create examples for those kids. Kids cannot be what they cannot see most of the time. So we need to highlight more women so that kids know, oh, look, she's doing that. And one of the things that I always say is that neither careers nor chores have genders. So the first thing is that we need to create gender neutral households. And then from there, we can go to a gender neutral society and professions. There is no job that can be more, should be more for a female child or your female child or to a male kid. all the chores. So you see that this begins at when we pick a blue and pink romper for the child that is coming to this world. And then the chores, and then the responsibilities in the household. So from the start, the female mind is being trained to go in a different way. So we need to have gender neutral households. And then from there, we can go to gender neutral societies. Middle school is very important time in a child's life, and that's when they decide fields. So we need to make sure that when the girl child enters the middle school, she is encouraged and supported to pursue science and technology careers. And there's one more thing that I would like to add if we have time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And we'll take some questions if you want to ask anybody. And you can just raise your hands and we can come to you there.
I've seen, that is my first-hand experience and may not be true for everybody else, but I've seen with my female colleagues that women are very, very bad at taking criticism from other women. But the same is, at least in my experience, but the same is not true for men. So if a man would guide or mentor another junior in the field, he would take the criticism somewhat with more, open-mindedness as women do. So if my superior, who is a woman, would say something, bash me or say something, which is eventually to improve me or perform better, I would take it very negatively. So we need to be more open towards criticism and take it as an opportunity to improve ourselves. And I think more women need to lean in circles. We need to support each other. We need to see each other and felt seen. That's very important. I mean, being a PhD student and working in aerospace, it's been a lonely journey. And I would have loved to have a female mentor who could have supported me from a female perspective, So I really think that more women, and IWWOF is one of the examples. So we need to lean in circles more. So, yeah.
That's so good. And to just summarize what I have been listening from you all is that to create a change, we need structural and more different ways to work at the same issue. So starting from the very early age, focusing and encouraging our girl children for the STEM fields. And then moving on to creating a social changes in our own homes, in our own surroundings, on how we see gender, roles in our society. And moving on to the organization level, where we need to all come together to create these environments that are inclusive for non-males and people who are not or who are underrepresented. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. But the only thing is, I feel personally, is the intent and the will to act. Because we can talk a lot, we can say a lot, but until we take a step forward and do something, act on it, it's not going to change. Janne.
Just a quick comment. I think it goes beyond STEM. I mean, technology is penetrating society in so many ways, and learning to, do technology and all that, I think, is crucial for everyone. What we're discussing here goes way beyond STEM, I would say.
Definitely. It's the whole social issue. But do we have any questions? Does anyone want to say something or want to add something? Yeah.
I'm really interested about this of trying to get a gender neutral home, and I think parents should also be encouraged to that, but they should also get some kind of support for doing that. Like, for example, I know that in kindergarten they don't play this is for girls and this is for boys, but like if you go to a shop, for example, parents, I see that still nowadays in 2022, the side for boys is, for example, on this Kahn, this very technical cars and so on. And then instead I see the girl side and there is still unicorn, poop, glitter, whatever. And having in the family a boy and a girl, I'm like, why can't it be the other way also? Why the girl cannot have a Meccano that's more inviting for a girl rather than having just a Batman Meccano? Also, the girl could be interested in a unicorn for the boy, we don't know. But how can, for example, we as society can somehow push also the marketing of these things? How can we do it practically?
Would you like to
go? The answer from a business school guy would be, consumer behavior and sales and all that. So we can do a lot of things ourselves. But I'm quite reluctant to give any advice to people on how to live their lives. But I fully support the underlying idea here, and so that all people could have everything, the choice. It would be fantastic, but it's difficult, I would say, for many reasons.
Yeah, go ahead. You want to say something?
Yeah. So I think on that note, I think it's definitely good in our current trajectory. I think that's very good to have parents who are conscientious of that and are actively trying to change up that narrative, right? But I think a part of it is also remembering, and this is my personal plea to all of you, is that we also have defaults in our minds, and sometimes we project that into the next generation without thinking about it, without knowing it. So for example, in my family, my mom, to up my mathematics skills, whenever we went to the shop, she would ask, okay, calculate how much this total was without looking at the till, right? And so that started developing this intuitive notion of like, okay, I need to have this skill. But this exact same behavior apparently has been researched in parenting, and actually turns out that even in households where parents are trying to be more gender neutral and trying to encourage girls into STEM fields, they default to a cognitive bias where they don't do this as often for girls than they do to boys. So I think there's my call and my personal plea is part of that solution is also in us recognizing, us recognizing what biases we have, noticing the differences in toys. But there are other things that we also might not notice until a very particular moment, and we say, oh, I made this assumption about this girl, or I made this assumption about this boy, and it's continuing that narrative.
Yeah, totally. So I think finding your own biases, and then of course I think from the organization perspective, it's also very important to be more inclusive in their marketing and communications. And I think that is changing slowly, and hopefully we will reach there. So there is someone there, and then we come to Malin. Yeah.
We are talking about technology and related fields. In my view, they are all just tools to do something. So my question is, like, do you see that the problems that they're trying to solve usually are the problems that females want to solve are different than what the problems are that male want to solve?
So sorry, whether the problems we're trying to solve in technology are gendered?
The tools that we use, are they biased? Are they? Okay.
Because we are people of these tools, they are developing solutions to problems. They want to solve something. Are those problems gendered?
So from my perspective and my experience and in my research, I would say that we're at a stage right now, and I think this could be a good narrative for technology in general, is that whatever problems we have in technology are still problems that have been projected by what old problems that we've had, just now in a new platform. And the worst part is that the technology has made it at a much larger scale that affects a lot more people. So we have the exact same problems as we had in real life. Sorry, you're shaking your head. That's not your question.
I think what you're trying to ask is like, are the problems that we are thinking are gendered? And I think that, I'll make a comment and over to you, Janne. I think that, of course, it is also an awareness issue. The more diversity you have, the more problems you might identify, because having more homogeneity, it doesn't enable you to see everything. For example, I cannot understand the experiences of, let's say, a Black woman or a woman with disability. And for me, the problem would be super different. So I think that we still have the problems that we have not identified that could make our solutions much more inclusive. And that's a step that we all need to take towards it. Does that answer your question?
I would like to add a bit to it. Of course, they are gendered, because how do we know that there is a problem? By the voices we hear and the voices that project it. And we have seen the statistic that there are more male voices than women. You can even see it's regarding women's hygiene products. How much innovation do you see that has been in it? It's the same since times unknown, yeah. So that's what I'm saying, that the problems are gendered because the problems that we know or are highlighted and the technology is being developed for it is gendered. Because to recognize a problem, to address the problem, we would need funding. Who are the investors investing in? How are the research grants being granted? If nobody is going to recognize, hey, there's a problem, I want to solve it by this method, then it won't be solved. And if we have more male voices, then of course everybody tries to solve the issue with their own perspective. And since more male perspective has more recognition and more voice in tech industry or in general in the world, then of course I would say the problems are gendered or are gender biased. Yeah. That are getting highlighted, if I got your question right.
So sorry, we are running out of time. So I would ask our panelists to, we will take all the comments after we can put down the, sorry, is there someone else? Yeah. I think that we should tell girls to join the society. It's very important to their voice, that it's okay to do a lot of female like studies together on female or houses, because it's not just a mental and the works on education. So it goes genders and also bring more men in all the female fields. Yeah, I think that's a very good point to summarize it, that we have to really look at the world from a very different perspective so that we can create solutions that are not, okay, this is the default solution and then let's add women and then let's add non-binary people. Instead of that, just create the whole thing into that works for people, no matter what background, gender, nationality, ethnicity they come from. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Janne, Zainab, and Elena, for joining us. And once again, a very happy International Women's Day to all of us. Woo! Thank you.